Welcome to Curiosity Invited, everybody. My name is David Bryan, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Jeff Schoep. I've said that right? It's one of those names, that Schoep, Schoep.
Yep.
Not like it's spelled, but so thank you so much for doing this, and appreciate it. Where are you? You're in Detroit. Are you at home in Detroit?
Yeah, I'm in Detroit. Thanks for having me on the program, David. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah. Well, it's an honor. It depends. So I should say something about who you are. And Jeff Schoep's name is familiar to people, if at all, because he was for 25 years the head, I don't know if the director of the National Socialist Movement. National Socialist Movement I believe it still exists, is a spin-off or a product of the American Nazi Party. And so Jeff was a member of the organization, I believe, for 27 years, and the leader of it for 25 of those 27 years. And he has, in the last several years, and we'll hear about that story, spent virtually all of his professional time and probably his personal time trying to undo his affiliations, undo the damage if there was damage done by what he did, and essentially, well, I'm going to let you explain what it is you're doing now. And but I think the question that's burning for me, really, before we even start that, is about forgiveness. And I mean that in terms of forgiveness, forgive yourself and other people forgiving you. So is that a struggle? I mean, was it a struggle? Is it a struggle for you to have come to the realization of what you were doing in the world and forgiving yourself for doing that?
It certainly was a struggle. I still struggle with the word forgiveness because a lot of times when I look back on my life and the things that I've was involved in and stuff, it's a difficult thing. It's a difficult word, I guess you could say, to contend with. I'd like to say that I've forgiven myself, and I think that the work I'm doing now speaks for itself and is redemptive and working towards reconciliation and all of those things. So I think that's important as well. But I struggle with that word because there's a lot of there's people out there in the world that I've met countless people. I couldn't even give you a number that have said, that they've forgiven me, and I've apologized to some of the people that I was nasty to in my previous. I like to say previous life. It was the same life, but
yes, right.
Yes. Yeah. I like to look at it as if it was somebody else, but so I've made a lot of positive strides in that. One of my friends, an African American man, he told me he was at one of my talks, and he said, he grabs me afterwards, when there was no one there, and he says, "You better not ever say that you don't forgive yourself, Jeff. That's going to hold you back. You're doing good things. Don't struggle with that." But I try to remember that when people ask, because it's tough. It's tough. Yeah. Like I take ownership for what I've done in my past, and I think that's an important part towards that, but not everybody can forgive. And I understand that too.
Yeah. I was thinking about that, and I too am not, it's not a word I use very much because it's a process, and it's also, I probably have done some things in my lifetime that, why should I be forgiven for that? I made a mistake, and I paid for it in some way, in one way or another, but it was unforgivable. And at the same time, kind of the spirit of it is like, don't let that thing keep you stuck in whatever that place is. But I'm also curious about, so I, when I first started thinking about this conversation, I was thinking about, well, how do people forgive you? The people that you hurt. And we can talk about, if you're willing to talk about what hurt means, but what about, so at first I was thinking of in terms of, well, have other people forgiven you? And then I thought, well, even bigger than that. I mean, you're the one who's more than anybody else, you are living with you. And so there's that, you have the vivid memories of the past, of your past. And so in some real way, that's a big one, forgiving yourself somehow, or whatever forgiving means, reckoning with your past in a way that is honest and genuine and real. So what do you say to people? So, okay, so, I mean, I'm not sure what my feelings are. I'm a Jewish man, and I knew I was Jewish from an early age. We were not particularly religious. In fact, we weren't religious at all, but it was clear I was Jewish. And it was clear to people who had a problem with Judaism. But what do you say to people in the categories that, whether Jews or people from Latino people, Latinx people, Black people, what do you say to them about who you were?
I'm just honest about it, and that's one of the things in like the talks and things that I do now, and in the work that I do now. I was really struggling with, how do I, show people, or how do I discuss with people about my past without traumatizing them or causing fear or things like that. So I've been very careful, and I still do it to this day. Once in a while, I'll ask people in different audiences, whether it's schools or civic groups or anything like that, like, why don't you take a look at this video that shows who I was in the past, and see if it's okay for your audience. See if you would think it's okay. Because and the reason we started adding that was because a lot of times I was doing talks and people were like, I don't get it. It doesn't make sense. I don't understand it. This guy's nice. He's kind. He's compassionate. All these things. They don't there's a big disconnect. But so when you show them like, this is who I was, and they see that, then it adds that context to it. And we've come to learn that it's kind of important to show that, because otherwise people don't understand it. But still,
I live my life of ideology. I pride myself on racial loyalty.
I got some justice for the Carr brothers, and it's right here! Good old-fashioned heritage justice!
White National Socialist, proud to be, and you could be a White National Socialist. White National Socialist, proud to be.
The rally in Toledo quickly turned ugly. Protesters, police, and neo-Nazis covered in tear gas as rubber bullets were fired at those refusing to stop the violence.
Nobody in America wants the illegals here. Nobody. Except for these corrupt politicians in that building back there.
The National Socialist Movement is the largest neo-Nazi group in the United States. They proudly display swastikas in their rallies and marches.
And if that symbol is what's holding us back, then we had to get rid of it.
Our first speaker is Commander Jeff Schoep, the National Socialist Movement.
Brothers and sisters, a new era is born. National Socialists are planned, and white nationalists stand together here. Unity, solidarity. No longer will this struggle be divided through infighting. Hail victory! Hail victory! the uniform you wear, the colors you fly. It is about the color of our skin. Stronger than ever, we are rising. They cannot stop us. This is just the beginning. This is the start of the revolution for our people.
Going back to forgiveness, speaking to at synagogues or to the Jewish community or other community, the Jewish community is the community I vilified the most when I was involved in that. Yes, absolutely. And I don't feel like I have the right to ask for forgiveness. And this is another reason why I struggle with that term, because I don't feel I have that right. And I know when I first spoke at the first time I spoke at a synagogue, afterwards, and the congregation were coming up to me and they were like, we forgive you. And it was really heartfelt and meaningful. I just didn't feel like I had, because someone asked about that too. And I said, I don't feel like I have the right to ask, to ask for it. If people give it, that's phenomenal. I love that. It's really wonderful, and it's a great feeling. And I think it's a healing process for both myself and for the victims. But that's really up to the individual. I don't feel like I should ask for that.
Have you ever had? So sometimes bigotry is about a group, and then sometimes it manifests in one-on-one, or you've done something to that person or those particular people. Have you had occasion to, when you're talking in a group or whatever, to sort of meet up with particular people that you, whatever counts as harm? And we'll talk about that, I hope. Have you had that event where, like, whether it was you called them something or you hurt them physically, or I don't know if that's a part of what you did, but those people, those particular people, and apologized?
There's a lot of that. A lot of what I'm apologizing for when I have those opportunities is a lot of is basically the rhetoric that I spewed. I wasn't out there necessarily like attacking people or doing illegal things, but what I was doing was spewing hateful rhetoric, and words can hurt people too in different ways than physical violence. So so I've had the opportunity to make amends with a few of those people that I've personally damaged. And one of those was just recently. And I don't drop names of people that I work with or people that I know typically, unless they're public figures and they're okay with it. So one person I did apologize to I shouldn't say just recently. It's been about 1.5 years now. Yeah. But one person that I connected with and apologized to was Rolanda from the Rolanda show back in the 90s, Rolanda Watts.
Oh, yeah.
I was a guest on her show, and we just did she just released the episode where we since we reconnected after like 30 years or 25 plus years. I don't even know. A long time.
I think I saw a clip of that show, probably not the whole show, but a clip of that show. It wasn't like you were having a real conversation with, you weren't trying to converse with her. You were telling the audience the way it is.
Yeah, that's accurate. And I thought, just thinking back on memories, and I probably should have rewatched that old episode, because it is online, and she's got a link to it in the latest program that we did. But I did apologize to her for my behavior on there, and she did forgive me, and that was a really incredible feeling. And it all took place as someone reached out and said, "Hey, I saw you on this show many, many years ago, and what would you think about reconnecting with her, somebody that knew her?" And I was like, that's somebody I owe an apology to. I would love to reconnect with her. And there it went from there. So, and she's a wonderful human being. I really adore her.
That's actually terrific that you get that opportunity. And I kind of want to, maybe I should wait for this, but I'm assuming that there are a bunch of people out there who don't have it in them, or don't think it's a good idea to trust you. Once a Nazi, always a Nazi, whatever that is, and or once a bigot, like, that was extreme. He was the leader of this thing for 25 years. Like, I'm not asking this as a joke, but, are you the smartest guy in the room? like wanting to make sure you don't get people coming after you legally or otherwise for the damage done in the past. And this is a great way to sort of distance yourself from whether it's liability or the other stuff that could be a fallout from that. I mean, I think, do you run into people who just don't trust that you've made some sort of transformation?
Well, sure. There's always going to be people that are skeptics, and I've had this conversation with other former extremists that have left too, and they said, the longer that you're away from that life, the longer you're away from it, the less that starts to happen. And I've already noticed that to some degree because I've had skeptics and things like that at first, and I try to put myself in their shoes, and I understand it. I was involved for a very long time. I was very high profile. And there will always be skeptics. At this point, I feel like, when I get asked that question, I don't get upset about it. I try to put myself in the shoes of people looking at it from the outside looking in. If I looked at it from just my perspective, then I'd be upset all the time. Like that's not helpful. So like I try to put myself in their shoes and understand it, and looking from the outside in and say, would you the best way I guess I can answer that is by saying, through actions and deeds, like I'm putting myself out there. I take ownership of what I've done in the past. I don't think, of course, there was a number of questions in your question there.
Sure,
so I'm going to try to
go for it.
Dissect
I mean,
them.
from my point of view, this conversation, any conversation works better if we're just having a conversation and I just happen to ask questions because, whatever, but because you don't know, there's nothing to ask about me, but so go where it takes you. Don't feel like you have to come up with the right answer here.
I don't know if there is right answers.
There's probably
there's
not.
lots of answers.
Yeah.
But as far as like leaving because of liability or legal issues, I was involved 27 years. I mean, there's legal issues over the years. I've had my house raided, I've been sued. I was sued a couple different times, things like that. If it fits someone's narrative and they want to say, oh, well, he left because of this or that, I mean, it doesn't make any sense. It's not rational. I was on the top in the world that I was involved in, and I'm not saying that to be cocky. It's not something I'm proud of. I'm deeply ashamed of it. But I was on the top when I left, and when I left, it caused a lot of complications and a lot of issues and a lot of problems for me. And starting over at life, my business was involved in this stuff. And again, I'm not saying this for sympathy, but I'm saying it for context to explain to any individuals that are out there that may still be questioning me, that I gave up everything. I gave up my career. I gave up my business that I had built. Everything, my whole life was involved in this stuff. When I came to the conclusion that I was doing the wrong thing, I couldn't reconcile with that. I couldn't. It would have been easier to stay on board and just go through the motions and pretend. But as a man, I can't do that. If I don't believe in something, I can't fight for it. So I couldn't stay any longer. I stayed longer, a couple years longer than I should have, because I was struggling with, well, what next? What do I do next? I knew I was going to speak out when I finally did leave, but I didn't know how that was going to look or where to start or anything. I was just like, well, here we go off into the wide unknown. I had to relearn what I call civilian life, like being out of the movement and learning how to be a civilian again. I felt like I was at war all the time. And so like learning to be a civilian was, that took a little time too, so it was a lot, but it was the right thing to do. So I don't have any regrets whatsoever. But and that further in context, you're doing the work that I'm doing now. Of course, there was people that didn't like what I was doing when I was in the movement. I had enemies, on the far left extreme, people like that. But I also had all these people in this group behind me. So leaving that, you walk out, you're basically, now you're alone, and that's the guy that used to run the Nazi party. Right. Oh. So like now I've got the people on the far right that don't like me because I'm in their mind, I betrayed them by leaving.
Right.
And on the far left, they're like, well, he's not one of us, or he's not over here on the far extreme on our side. Right. So he's still a Nazi. You don't
have a lot of friends. You don't have a lot of friends in that situation.
That's not true. I mean, that's not.
Well, I mean, you got those people hating you for this, for what you did, and those people hating you for what you're doing now.
Yeah. It's a lot. I think a lot of times when people make those judgments and when they talk about those things or think about those things, they don't think about all that. And why should they? It's not them. It's not their life.
Right.
So I try to take it all into context and just say like, hey, look, all I can do is, I could do anything else. I know business. I have leadership skills, these different things that I could do. But instead, I'm putting myself out there at risk to try to do this work, to try to make a difference, to try to reverse some of the negative things that I'd done in the past. And also because I feel like I can make a difference here. And I have been. And that being said, I do work with the Simon Wiesenthal Center today. I've been vetted by them. I've consulted for different governments around here in the US as well, work with law enforcement. And I just spoke at the Nobel Peace Center in Norway. So it's if someone doesn't believe, then I guess everybody else is wrong. All those.
Right. Can we talk a little bit before we talk about just for background about the National Socialist Movement? What are you doing now? I know you've got an organization that you started to try to undo. It's almost like the opposite of, but can you talk some about that?
Yeah, and I keep using the term reverse osmosis because I'm trying to reverse the trend. But one of the things I'm doing now is I started a 501c3 called Beyond Barriers. It's a nonprofit. And the reason for that is when I first left the movement, not immediately, but after I started speaking out.
Which was when? When did you leave?
I left in March of 2019, and I started speaking out that fall or late summer or fall
of that year.
Of that year, yeah.
Got it. Okay, yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to give a
right. So,
so you started a 501c3.
Okay, yeah.
There they go.
I was trying to remember where I left off. I started Beyond Barriers. It's a 501c3 nonprofit, and the idea behind that, aside from peace building, and it was extremist disengagement and de-radicalization. So a lot of people were reaching out when I first put out just my personal website, and they were curious, like, what happened? Why did you leave? And now there's an opportunity for conversations. Oh, other people were trying to leave, and I helped a lot of people leave, and I still help a lot of people leave, from all different sorts of extremism. That's one of the things we do. So it's not about, for me, it's not about the personal motivation. It's not about saving that one guy, that one lady, 10, 15 people, 20 people here or there. It's not about them, but it's about if we off-ramp the next mass shooter, if we off-ramp the next, person that's going to walk into a synagogue or a mosque or a church or something of that nature, how many innocent lives are we potentially saving? That's the big picture. That's the way I look at it. I mean, of course, we want to help each individual that reaches out, and we do the best we can with it, and we've helped a lot of people. But the big picture is societal aspect of it. I'm sorry.
So no, it's me interrupting, and I'm sorry. So, but when you say you help someone leave, what does that actually mean? What does that entail? You mean you talk them through it? You mean they're struggling with the question of what will happen? What does that actually look like, helping someone leave?
Yeah, so we don't, and my brother Daryl Davis, who you have had on your program, he'll tell you this. he works with us at Beyond Barriers, and he's like family, and he'll tell you too. He says, I don't. In the news and things like that, they'll say Daryl Davis has walked over 200 people out of the Klan, and he says, I helped facilitate that, but I didn't do it. They did it. And I'm going to say the exact same thing because it's true. It's accurate. That doesn't work. That doesn't cause the change doesn't happen in here in the heart. And they may speak those words and say those things, but it's not real. We want the change to be real. And the only way change can be real is if it comes from on the inside and the person does it themselves. So we don't necessarily de-radicalize them. We help facilitate that. We help talk them through it. A lot of times we have a program we call Relational Dialogue, and it's based on the same principles that were utilized to reach myself by Daryl Davis and my friend sister Deeyah Khan, how they were able to reach myself and so many other people is the same process, similar process that we use to reach others. So a lot of times it has to do with listening, it has to do with dialogue, it has to do with and it also has to do with reframing of questions and the way people look at things and getting them to challenge themselves so they're able to walk through it. So we it's a lot of talking and a lot of listening and a lot of reassuring people. I can't, like I said, I can't give you names, but I can tell you some. I can share some of the stories if it comes up or anything like that. But I am just thinking of one particular story right now where it was a young man that wanted to go into law enforcement. He was in a radical extremist group for a few months, and he left, and then he was doxxed by the far left. And he was like, and then he was under threat of being doxxed from the group he was involved in. So he would have been doxxed twice. And he was like, I'm out. I made a mistake. I didn't want to be involved in this. And he says, and he was so upset. He said, I'm not going to be able to pursue my career in law enforcement, that my whole family's, line is involved in this. And I have to give up that dream now. And I asked him, I said, why do you say that? And he says, well, because I was doxxed. My life's over, basically. I can't do that. And I said, let's talk through this. So I wanted to know if he had gotten arrested, if he had any criminal offenses, all these different things. And he didn't. His record was clean. So I told him, I said, you could still go into these fields. You don't have to give up on that. And it just, his whole aura or his whole reality about him just completely shifted and changed. And he was like, oh my gosh, are you serious? Like, I can still do this. And it was like a weight was lifted off the man's back, and that's just one example, one small example of countless stories like that.
And if you don't mind me asking, so you've made reference to we do this and we do that. Do you mean the business? Is the business essentially you, the 501c3, or is there a group of people? There is a team of people that participates in this, or is it?
Well, it's two different things. The work with Beyond Barriers is a whole team, and that was why I was saying that at first when I just started my personal website, the jeffschoep.com site.
I see.
I couldn't keep up. There was too many people reaching out, and I was like, I can't do this alone. I need to start a team. There was a lot of people reaching out that said they weren't willing to talk with some of the other groups that were out there or individuals that were out there doing it because they were too political, or they were, if someone's coming out of extremism, especially we work on all forms of extremism, but the majority of the people that are coming to us are from the far right, because that's where I'm known from. So they'll feel comfortable reaching out. But a lot of them will say like, hey, if I have to become Antifa, if I have to go far left or something like that, I'm staying. I'm not coming out. Or I won't talk to this person or that person because they're affiliated with that. And that's why I think it's so. If you're doing this work, anyone that's doing this work, I don't care who you are, you need to be nonpartisan publicly. And if you're not, you shouldn't be doing this work, period. Because you're not going to be effective. You'll fail at it.
It just occurred to me as you were speaking is something people want to get out. Is that a hard, it may be a psychologically hard thing, but are there certain expectations? Like if somebody is in the movement, a member of this organization or that organization, are you compelled to show up in a certain way, to go to different meetings. Why don't they just not show up anymore? Like, why don't they just don't come to meetings? You want out, so just get out, go. Well, why is that? Or is that? Is there really a compulsion, like you have to do this, or there's a consequence?
It depends on the organization. That's a good question, because I didn't really explain that either. And it really depends on the group. You know, some of the groups that you're involved in, and I can say in the group I was involved in, people would come and go all the time. Membership was like a revolving door there, because it was what you call an above ground organization, an organization that was functioning within the laws of the United States. You know, that, you know, if people were out breaking serious laws, they could get thrown out of the organization. But depends on, you know, you've got some of the other groups that function like gangs almost, your prison gang types, you know, a lot of those, you can't just walk away, you know, they'll come for you. So it really depends, you know, it really depends on the particular extremist group that one's involved in. So a lot of it is psychological in other ways. And it also depends on the group. So, we cover all those different aspects of it. And during my time when I was involved in this stuff, I spoke at a lot of different functions, not just for the NSM, but across the gamut as far as the different organizations. So I'm pretty familiar with most of them and how most of them operate.
So could you talk for a little while about the NSM itself, the National Socialist Movement? And I mean, as I understood it, you know, digging in, you know, it sounded unique, at least in my mind, who knows, but, you know, in reality, but it sounded unique in that somebody could maintain his or her membership in another organization, you know, whether it's the Klan or, you know, so whatever, and yet still be a member of the National Socialist Movement, that didn't sound like everybody did that.
No, and that's not really accurate. I mean, well, it is and it isn't. Let me explain that. So at one point, many, many years ago, like I think it was back in the 90s, the NSM had a kind of open policy where you could join different organizations. It didn't matter, because there's a lot of people that were doing that. And we call it like ideological promiscuity or whatever you want to call it. But you know, there was people that were doing that, and what I was finding as the leader is now you have somebody with dual loyalties. So I don't remember what year it was. I want to say late 90s, early 2000s. That was changed.
Got it.
It was gotten rid of. So it was like you had to, and later on, I don't know the exact year, but you had to go through a probationary process in the group to be vetted before you were patched in or given a patch. And you could not have dual memberships. You could be a dual member of something like that wasn't movement affiliated, like the Lions Club or the NRA or whatever, you know, but not like a competing organization, because and again, that's something that varies. The NSM was unique in a lot of different ways, but that's not really one of them.
So, okay, so can you speak for a while about the National Socialist Movement? I suspect a lot of people listening to this are not familiar, but so it stands for the National Socialist Movement, and what was its goal? What is its goal? Does it still exist, or is it pretty much gone?
The organization still exists, not in the same sense as it did when I was there. I mean, it's still around now, but it's a completely different I'm trying to think of the word, but it's a completely different animal now. It's a lot, it appears to be, I wouldn't know for sure, but it appears to be a lot smaller. It appears to be run completely differently than the way I did, but it does still exist. But what the organization was or is basically, as you said, is America's Nazi Party. It was a continuation of the movement of George Lincoln Rockwell. Right. It was started by and he was the original founder of the American Nazi Party back in the 1950s. The organization itself was started in 1973 by men that served with Rockwell, and I was mentored by one of them when I first joined the organization. That's who appointed me to run it. So
And
it
you
had
were
that.
you joined the organization when you were, I mean, a kid essentially, well, like 18, 19.
Yeah.
And but it was not very long after that that you were suddenly in leadership. So how'd that happen?
Well, yeah, and that wasn't something that I wanted or strive for or anything like that. But I was a local group leader in Minnesota at first, and I was recruiting, doing a lot of recruiting for the organization. It was pretty small by that time. It went through some changes in the in the 80s and or early 90s, and by the time I had gotten around to joining, it was a pretty small organization, and I was recruiting heavily and doing a lot of work for the group. And then when the leader of the organization had to retire, had to take care of some family issues and things like that, he says, if you'll accept the organization, I'd like you to run it because I have to retire. And I was just like, oh no, this is uh-oh. But I took it on, so I mean, I have no one to blame but myself for my own choices. But I did take it on, and then later on built it to be the largest organization of its kind in the country.
Well, I mean, there's two pieces to that's sort of surprising. One, I mean, one probably less. So having to make the choice of, stepping in some way very publicly into a role that is looked down on by a lot of people. But the other is, at a young age, suddenly, okay, you're the leader of this organization. I mean, like, were you doing things that prepared you for either or both of those? Like, how did it come to be that Jeff Schoep, nice boy growing up in, where'd you grow up? Midwest? Rural Minnesota. Nice boy growing up in rural Minnesota. I don't know what your home life was, but suddenly he's drifting into Nazis, right? And I'm like, how did this happen? You have some insight into that?
Yeah. So, first taking over the organization at that point was very challenging, especially when with older members, like having somebody that young.
You're a kid.
Running the group. Yeah, it was unheard of. Like, it was not, especially for such an old organization. It was absolutely unheard of, and there was a lot of challenges. Just on a perspective level during that time, that there was guys that were like, I'm not why should I have to listen to a young kid? What does he know? I've been in this group 20 years or whatever.
Yeah.
And why was I passed up? So there was some of that. So I had I learned a lot in the couple of years that I worked under the former leader, but I had to learn a lot as I went, and a lot of mistakes were made, and a lot of rules were put into place over the years, and a whole structure was built for the organization to maintain that, because you have to maintain discipline, you have to maintain order. It was a whole structure was set up. It was put into a corporation. It was there was a lot of things that it was run like a business, and eventually it started becoming run like a business, but also like I hate to say it, like almost like a paramilitary type of situation. It wasn't a democracy. It was a dictatorship.
There was a chain of command, etc.
Yes. But how I got in, David, is everybody has a different story or a different reason.
Sure.
And we can talk about that as well. But my reason was a little bit more unique or different. And it's not completely rare, because there's others that go in for this reason as well. But it's not one of the most common reasons, at least here in the U.S. anyways. So for me, it was my fascination. I come from a good home. My parents worked hard, and
what they do? What did your folks do? What did your dad? What was his job? What is his work?
So my father ran a manufacturing company. They would make hunting clothes and things of that nature, and he ran that.
Yeah.
And my mother was originally, she was a school teacher, and she taught German. My family's from Germany. My mom's side of the family is all from Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And then she became a lawyer. So that was they worked hard. Yeah. So my trajectory into the movement, though, was because of I skipped a little part here, but my grandfather fought in Hitler's army in World War II, and my great uncles did as well. So, and I need to preempt that as well by saying that they did not propagandize me. They did not recruit me into this. In fact, they actually highly discouraged me, tried to discourage me from it. But it was that fascination with my grandfather as a child growing up that as young as fourth grade, I was in the elementary school library checking out World War II books that were covered in dust nobody had checked out since
maybe ever.
Years and years and years, like they were in this. I still remember sitting like in this little corner in the library and pulling these books off of this bottom shelf where you had to like crouch down to get to it. And nobody was reading those books. They hadn't been checked out since some of them since the 60s or something. They're really old. So it was a little strange, but so my fascination was that historical connection, and that's the same reason why I joined the NSM, is because it had that historical connection back to Rockwell, which was something that I was looking for. There was other groups that I met with, skinhead groups, other organizations that I'd met with that probably would have been more appealing to a younger person, but I got involved with this old group because of the history. And so I wasn't taught to hate or anything like that growing up. That came later.
And so say that, talk about like, so there's something about Nazis, because I get that part. I get, like, it's family history and, grandfather. Did you know your grandfather? Yeah.
Yeah. He only died just a few years ago. Yeah.
Oh, wow. So he wasn't any longer sort of spouting that kind of stuff, but there was something about as you dug more into the Nazi literature or Nazi history, or like, you learned about World War II, at school and in conversations, and what do you have any insight into, like, what was fascinating about it? Why? Really, it's almost a question about the opposite. Do you have any insight into like why you weren't repelled by it rather than drawn to it? Not, your grandfather grew up in a certain place, and probably a lot of people went into you had to, right? So you went into the service, you went into the army because it was, and there was pressure to do that.
Yep.
But there wasn't pressure for you to do it. So what, do you have any idea about like, what about that? You ask yourself that question. I don't know, I'm not challenging you like you have to, but it's curious to me that that a young kid would read about what the Nazis wanted and say, yeah, that's for me. I don't get it. Do you get it?
A lot of people don't get it. No, I hear you. I understand. But it was this, I want to say like this false sense of reality in a way. One thing that we said in the movement a lot, and I used to say too, is like in history, it is the victors that write the history, in the wars and things like that. So later on, I felt this draw to the movement. It didn't have anything to do with hate or racism, at least in my mind.
Yeah.
Of course it is. We all know that, but that wasn't the entry point for me. And to be honest, and we can talk about this too, but it's not the entry point for most people that go into these movements. It's something that's learned and taught there, but that's a whole nother conversation or another part. But for me, it was that fascination. It was it just looked like I guess if you could break it down at that age and put myself back in really young Jeff's shoes, it was like, wow, this is cool. Like as a kid, you think it looks cool, it looks powerful, the uniforms, the discipline, all this kind of stuff. It has an appeal in that sense.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, in some ways, many ways, obviously there's a slice of the population of young kids who are drawn to the military here, right? There's something about the order. You get to use guns. That's kind of cool. you get to be good at all sorts of things. The young men, young boys are always growing up. Maybe young people generally are growing up wanting to feel more powerful because we are, as kids, relatively powerless. And so I get that piece. I'm just, I guess I'm the question mark that's sort of floating in the bubble above my head is the as you learn what it is, why isn't it this? No way. Versus this. That's the piece. That's puzzle. It's probably a puzzle for you too.
No, I know what it is now. It's
Tell me.
confirmation. It's confirmation bias is what it is. It's confirmation bias. And I always understood the concept of it, but I didn't know there was a term for it until I've been starting to, do the work I do now. But it's confirmation bias 100%. So you can have two sets of what you would see as facts, what the individual would see as facts. But really only one set is the facts, but the other is it fits your narrative. And we see this in a lot of aspects of society now, where people want something to fit to their narrative. And this is what with confirmation bias is what it does. So you have the real history here, like, for example, in my case with World War II, and you have revisionist history over here on the other hand. And when you start becoming radicalized and you start filling into these concepts, then all you want to believe is what fits your narrative. It's what fits that. So the Holocaust revisionism and all that fit the narrative for me. And I just took it hook, line, and sinker, and then just started wanting to read everything I could on it. And I felt like much like a cult, you feel like you have this new truth that you're learning about this stuff, and it's all right there, and they're giving you references, and now this new truth, and you need to go out and spread the word. And I think another part of it is in life, for a lot of people, having a mission is really important. Being greater than you are, having something fulfilling what you do. And this is something a lot of people struggle with coming out of the movement too, is finding that new mission.
Right.
I have a new mission, so it's not for me, the new mission is much better. It's actually doing something good. Instead of thinking I was doing something good, it's actually doing something good for society and all that. So that's something that we try to find for a lot of people. Not everybody wants to do this, or not everybody can do it. And it's a lot of, it's not easy, but,
oh my God. I mean, to look at all the people who retire and they're like miserable. Right? Like,
yeah. Yes.
What?
Yeah, exactly.
Now
that's
what?
just it.
Right. Yeah.
Right. You have to have it could be a sport. It could be anything. But it's good to have a mission for everybody in life. And you hear about that a lot too. Just your example of retirement was perfect, because a lot of folks, when they retire and all of a sudden they don't have nothing to do or any purpose.
You feel like you just dropped off the edge of the cliff, right?
Right. And there's a word in the German language, and I don't remember the word anymore because it's been too long, but there's a word for that, like not having a purpose in life, and it doesn't translate into English. And I always thought, I got to remember that word because I heard family talking about it.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Very interesting. Okay.
So there you were building this organization, and I'm assuming in all sorts of ways that meant, speaking about it, what is, just because you mentioned it before, but what does recruiting look like? So you think about recruiting for the Army, you set up shop you set up a table at the college campus, and people come up to the table and they ask questions about what's it them, what do you offer them, what is it like, and blah, blah, blah. But how do you recruit for the NSM or for any of the other groups that are in that, in that white supremacist, is that the right terminology? The supremacist field? Whatever.
Yeah. I mean, they would call it, some of them would call themselves white supremacists. Others would say separatist, or
separatists,
different names for it. But generally speaking, the NSM was engaged in all kinds of different recruitment stuff, everything from old school passing out leaflets to publications of the NSM magazine and bulletins, newsletters. Also music, every kind of music you could imagine from around the world. So eventually there was a record label that I started that was promoting and selling that kind of music. NSM developed two first-person shooter video games, violent video games. All of these things were being used for recruitment. Also podcasts and radio shows, things like that were being put out. Online presence. At one point there was a social networking site that was built to do this stuff, that was similar to like Facebook or Twitter. And all kinds of, you name it, everything, every type of aspect of recruiting, the group was involved in it. It was very prolific in that sense.
And what would, I mean, the goal of recruiting is to get more people, but what was the end game? Like, what if the NSM could have snapped its fingers, if you or the other members could have snapped their fingers and just, or that show Bewitched, wiggle your nose and make it happen?
So like the slated goal of the organization was to have a white homeland as basically an area, part of the United States, or there was a lot of talk of like balkanizing the United States, where it might split up into different parts. Is basically the end goal was to have an all white area that was just white people, presumably, and it's not realistic. It was never realistic, but we convinced ourselves that was the goal. And
okay, so there you are. You're going along. The organization is growing, and successful. I'm assuming. There clearly were people who volunteered. Were there a lot of paid staff? It's a big organization, right? At some point.
The vast majority of the people, it was all volunteers, almost entirely volunteers. Towards the last, I don't know how many years, 10, 15 years that I was involved, there was a couple people that were paid for their work, doing some of the skilled computer people or things like that, but it was never very, very much, because the organization just... It was big, but it was also not well funded.
Yeah.
And that varies between different groups, but the vast majority of the people that were involved in the NSM were blue collar, working class people and poor. And in later years, you had a lot more middle class that were coming in, which was really different, because the organization was very, very poor for many years.
Did you get paid? Did you have another job?
My job was running the record label. That's where my job was. So the organization itself wasn't bringing in enough to pay me either. So no.
Right. And did you have a family throughout this process? Like, a wife and kids or whatever that is, however that.
Yeah.
You did. And were they involved in the movement, or no? This was dad's going off to a meeting.
Yeah. How do I explain this? So the children never got involved in the movement, which was good. And I'm so thankful for that. They knew what I was doing, they knew I was involved and all that, but it wasn't shoved down their throats or anything like that. But it was, they knew what I was involved in, unfortunately. But I think as and this is something that I had to ask myself too after leaving, because a lot of people were in the movement. Some would, really work hard to bring their children involved and get them involved, and others would wait and let them make their own choices. And my thing was like, mine can wait until they're 18 and make their own choices. But I still wanted to discourage it, because every parent, I believe, wants a better life for their children than what they had. And I know some of the things that I had went through in those years that I was involved. Everything from attempts on my life to the different violence and things that took place. I didn't want that for my kids.
Mm-hmm.
So on one hand, there's a lot of disconnects when you break down extremism, and that was it. It's like, okay, so this is good enough for you to risk your life and be involved in this stuff, but it's not good enough for your kids. No, it wasn't. I wanted a better life for them. I really did.
And did that come to pass, or were they drawn into it eventually, or no? Not at all.
None.
Yeah. And are they in your life now?
Yeah.
That's great. And was there a time when they weren't because of the activities, or no? They were always your kids. It was a family. Yeah.
It does cause being involved in extremism causes incredible damage to the family units in a lot of cases. And I didn't share this yet with you, but how it damaged my mom's career permanently. She was elected in the state of Minnesota to be a judge, which was her dream. And there was
your involvement in the NSM damaged her career. Big time.
And originally, when I first started speaking out, I didn't want to talk about this because it was so stressful, I guess you could say, and it is painful, as my mom's passed on now, and thinking about it, it was a very difficult time, but how it was explained to me, and I think I've been told, colleagues and friends will say, I think it's important, people should hear this, because I always think I'd rather talk about other people's situations than my own. It's always tough to talk about your own, but I think it's important for context and for people to kind of understand, like, hate and being involved in this stuff doesn't just damage civil society and the people that it's targeting it, but it also damages the people that are in it and the families of the people that are in it. And this is one really good example of that in particular. And the way it was explained to me, there was a formality in the judgeships in Minnesota. So she was elected. She was elected. Yes. And the formality was that the governor, and this is it differs in every state, and I don't know if it's changed. I have no idea, but this is how my mother explained it to me back then. So the governor signs off on all the new judges. It's basically a formality in the state. And he calls my mother up and says, "Mrs. Schoep, your son is leading the Nazi party. Your father fought in the German army during World War II. We do not feel you are fit to be a judge in this state." My mother was like a liberal, not far left, but a liberal Democrat. And so she had nothing to do with anything that I stood for. And it destroyed her. That was her dream. So she was robbed of her dream because of my involvement. And a lot of people would say, well, wouldn't that have made you think twice? Like, wouldn't that have driven you right out of the movement? No, it did the exact opposite.
I was about to say, I mean, there's a way in which you could, almost the opposite is like, well, you see, this is what we're fighting against. How could they do this to somebody like that? Did your mom, for lack of a better way of putting it, but like, did she hold a grudge? Was she pissed off at you? Or she was obviously pissed off at them, but was she pissed off at you?
Yes. I mean, I was really close to my mother, and we remained close. But when that happened, there was a period of time, and I don't remember how long it was. It felt like a couple of years.
Yeah.
And maybe it wasn't, but it felt like a couple of years where she would not hardly talk to me, because she felt it was my fault. I feel like the right thing that the governor should have signed it, because she had nothing to do with what I was doing or anything like that. But on the flip side,
well, there's a way in which that's a small example, almost a shadow of how things have evolved since, right? So I don't mean with you. I mean, so somebody does something that pisses one side or another off, and now it mobilizes, it mobilizes everyone to, whether it's canceling or firing or whatever, and that splatters on the family, on the kids, and it's always terrible, and at least to my mind, never justified. It becomes it's like a weapon of mass destruction.
Yeah.
Right? It's like suddenly the punishment is not visited on the target, but instead everything. So it's like the terrorism of everyday life. So,
very, very well stated. The thing it reminds me of is when you hear about people trying to escape North Korea. Now, this is an extreme example, but when someone tries to escape North Korea, and then you hear about, well, they're going to go after their whole family's in a camp now, and they might not even have known. Right. It's just that's the way they keep control.
Okay, so there you are, and being successful at it in ways that the organization has never been successful before. And 25 years now, it's like, I know what it's like to stay in a role for a long time, and then it becomes, for whatever reason, whether it's age or nagging or or wondering, but what happens? What happened to you? Like, well, all of a sudden you're thinking about it. So can you talk about and I know some of you made reference to some of the people you met along the way, but would you be willing to talk some about like what that change, what brought it about? How did you participate in it? How did other people participate in it? So like that. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm being long-winded here.
No, it's okay. It wasn't a snap of a fingers overnight decision, and I have some of those stories for other people, but in my case, it took longer. And for some people, it takes years and years and years. Some people, it's a snap of a finger, as this one act of kindness or compassion. For me, it was acts of kindness and compassion as well, but it took time. Like I kept trying to. And much like being in a cult, you just keep trying to justify it. You keep trying to, fit your narrative, or like with that confirmation bias I was talking about earlier. But what it was that, there was a lot of things that played a role in my disengagement and de-radicalization process. And speaking of that, I did it backwards. Usually when we work with cases, we want someone to disengage from the group. And then we start working on de-radicalization because they're away from that, all their peers and things like that, and they can think more clearly. My process was backwards. I was de-radicalizing while I was still the leader of the movement, and the disengagement came later, unfortunately. And I don't recommend that route. It's backwards. So what was happening was I'm meeting different people. First, I had moved to Detroit. I started meeting white people are the minority here, and I'm meeting people from all different walks of life, and I'm starting to see the humanity in people that I wasn't seeing before. Because when you're in these groups, you're behind the barriers, or you're in an echo chamber. You isolate, and that's your world. Again, much like a cult, but
you were still in the group, right? You're still
in the group. Yeah,
right. You're still running the show.
Yep. So I'm still trying, and now I've around 2016 or around this time, I'm starting to say, no, look, we're calling this a white civil rights organization. So, and I call this putting lipstick on a pig, because I was trying to dress up the Nazi party. But in my mind, looking at it now, it's like laughable and ridiculous and stupid. But at the time, it made total sense. It was like, oh, this isn't a hate group. I convinced myself it wasn't a hate group. I know the listening audience is rolling, going, oh my God, this guy's, this is nuts. But in my mind, I convinced myself of that it wasn't, and that I was doing something good and noble and all these things. So I'm making some changes in the group, don't use racial epithets, don't, this and that. I'm making changes. Eventually got rid of the swastika from public use in around 2016. But I want to say the biggest seeds of change that were planted, it started with Daryl Davis and then Deeyah Khan. And I can explain that further if you like.
Please. Yeah.
So Daryl Davis, just for context, for those that don't know him, he's an African-American musician. He played with Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Elvis Presley. He's very well known. He sets the piano keys on fire. Incredible musician. What he
Quite
does,
amazing.
yeah, he's just phenomenal. Anybody gets a chance to see him, please do. He's phenomenal. But what else he does is he helps get people out of these type of organizations. Well, I had gotten a phone call from the Daryl's producer for his film Accidental Courtesy. I didn't even know I was meeting Daryl Davis, and this, so I'm in my role as the leader of the NSM. I'm in History Channel stuff, National Geographic, whatever. I'm interviewing with people in documentaries all the time. It was part of the role, nothing new. But typically, I would look into whoever I was meeting, the background, all this kind of stuff. And for whatever reason, I don't know if it was fate or carelessness, whatever you want to call it. I want to say it's fate, but because I always, for security purposes and everything else, like dug into the backgrounds of people that I was meeting with back then. And I didn't do that this time. I just said, sure, I'll be in the film. Sounds interesting. I'll be in it. Where do I need to be? So I didn't know I was meeting with Daryl Davis. I'm sitting outside with my girl on the bench outside this place where we were supposed to meet, and this big black man comes up to me. You must be Jeff Schoep. Who are you? And that was the beginning of meeting Daryl Davis. And what I found, and then after I started talking to him, I was like, oh, this is that guy that gets Klan people out. This should be interesting. I'll show him is what I was thinking. And I didn't realize that, I would make a friend and a brother for life during that was our first meeting. And so we're filming, we're talking, and how he could relate and how perceptive he was and how intelligent he was, all these things. And we had all these things in common, like with music and background and all this kind of stuff. So I thought, this is somebody that I would like hang out with. This is, but I can't, because I'm the head of the movement. I'm not supposed to like this guy, and what he had said to me that really got to me in that conversation was he told me about how racism and hate affected him as a child, what sent him on the journey. That's a good
story, right?
It. So yeah.
Oh yeah. He talked about it, that, being 10 years old and at the Boy Scout parade or Cub Scout parade or whatever it was, and getting pelted, being the only black kid there and not understanding why anybody was upset. Like what? Yeah. And hearing from his parents that, the story of what racism is, and actually not believing it because it was so not a part of his experience in any way. Really quite powerful.
And him sharing that and sitting across from me and sharing how that affected him. And he's not showing emotion because Daryl's a strong guy. He's a tough guy. So he's not showing it, but I'm reflecting as I'm hearing this story, and I'm thinking, in the movement, we always said family, race, and nation. We always were saying these things. And I was like, if this ideology, let me put it that way, if this ideology is affecting this individual, that I'm sitting across from in this manner, how many other people across the world has it affected in that way or worse? And what if I'm trying to put myself in his shoes to understand his story and thinking, what if somebody would have done that to one of my children? That's where my mind went. So I'm thinking about that, and it's like, there was so many disconnects. When you would hear things like that, you would always say like, oh, you kind of dismiss it and say like, oh, maybe it was just a crazy person that did that. We did the same thing. I did the same thing too. Every time there was a mass shooter or something like that. And you go, the guy must've went crazy. Instead of thinking, maybe this ideology is driving people to do this. We would just dismiss it as, well, that person went nuts. They went crazy. But it's if it happened once, twice, you could make sense of that. But when it's happening again and again and again and again, no, there's something wrong with the ideology. And it took me way too long to figure that out. But soon after meeting Daryl, I had met another filmmaker, a Muslim lady by the name of Deeyah Khan, and I'd gotten to know I was one of the main characters in her film White Right Meeting the Enemy. I'd gotten to know her quite well, and she's like family now as well. But she really got to me in the sense of sharing a story similar to Daryl's. And she said, I'm sitting across from her, and she says, Jeff, the movement that you were a part of, ideology that you stand for, made a little girl feel less than, ugly, hated, not worthy. And David, I tell you, I could not. I mean, the cameraman noticed it and everything and zoomed in on my eyes because I could not reconcile with that. That made me feel like garbage. And it wasn't just that. Like, I could see the pain in Deeyah's face, but I could feel it like an energy, like a vibe in the air, like it just hit me. And it felt like getting kicked in the chest by a horse. Made me feel like complete garbage. And I was like, okay. And then I started thinking about how it affected Daryl. And then I was like, I can't be involved in this anymore. I can't do this.
How long from those experiences were you able to somehow extract? Did it take you to sort of extract yourself from that? I mean, I recognize the extraction is in some ways, we're all extracting ourselves from our biases and bigotries and et cetera, hopefully, but how long before you really had to, because you couldn't stomach it anymore, make the move?
Longer than I'd like to admit. That was meeting her, I think, was in 2017, and it took. Like I said, I left in the beginning of 2019. I was struggling with it for quite a while. And Deeyah was one of the only people I could count them on one hand. A couple of girlfriends, my dad, and Deeyah were about the only people that knew I was going to leave, that I was struggling with it. And I was like, I don't know. I kept making excuses in my mind, like, well, what am I going to do for, my business is involved in this, what am I going to do about this? There was corporate responsibilities. There was all these different things going on. Like, maybe I should stay, maybe I should go, and I was just struggling with it for way longer than I should have been. I should have just walked away in 2017, but it took, so that's something.
Was there an element of being afraid for your life? Like, was there the possibility that you getting out would be, would piss enough people off so much that suddenly your life is in danger? Or
well,
that wasn't a pressing factor.
That wasn't really the pressing factor in that sense. I mean, yeah, there is risk involved in it and all that, but if I would have just retired and just been done, just walked away and never looked back, the movement wouldn't not have coming after me or something like that.
I see.
So but that's an aspect that some people struggle with, but it wasn't. I'm not like, I still struggle. Like, I don't like the word fear or being afraid, but a lot of what the belief system of the movement is based on fear, if you break it down. But just as a man, I mean, I don't have a lot of fears. I was in a dangerous environment for 27 years, and I'm still in a dangerous environment. So it's just that's life, But that wasn't really part of it.
Yeah. Do you think that is it? Well, I mean, I guess I want to ask, from where you're sitting, how are we doing? I mean, like, is hate on the rise? Or I mean, has it changed since? I mean, many folks, and I understand why, and maybe that's true, want to point at 2016, Donald Trump got elected, and suddenly there was this, at least a conversation. I don't know. The conversation about more hate crimes, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, or are we on the way? Which direction is this going in? From where you're sitting as somebody who is so saturated in the movement and so familiar with it.
I don't like to be alarmist, but I think the direction the country's, excuse me, I think the direction the country is going in right now is really not good. The polarization that we're experiencing and that we're seeing in civil society, even on the levels of like between the Democrats and Republicans, is horrific. It is something that is so it's not something that I don't think most of us have seen in our lifetimes. I mean, there's always been that, Democrats and Republicans, back and forth, and that's normal. And that's okay. I think that's part of having a democracy. But the way we're seeing it now, and we all know these people in our social circles or sometimes in our families or people that we know, where they'll say, well, if you voted for Joe Biden, I'm not talking to you, or you voted for Donald Trump, I'm not talking to you. What is wrong? I don't have any right to judge because I was a radical extremist myself, but it's like, what is wrong, people? Like, are you serious? Like, does it really matter that much who one voted for, that you're gonna cut these people off out of your family or out of your circle of friends? And this is super, super common right now. And we didn't have that before. And now we're having that now. So I don't blame Trump for it, and I don't blame Biden for it. I think a lot of us are playing a part in it. I think the media plays a part in it as well. But we're all like, not all of us, but a lot of people are in these echo chambers. And what's so dangerous about that is it's some of the first steps to radicalization, because if someone's talking like that, I'm not talking to you because you voted for Donald Trump or you voted for Joe Biden. That's somebody that's on the verge of stepping into radicalization, because now they're closed off, where they're not willing to listen to someone else's opinions. And they're not having dialogue, and they're trapped in that bubble. And as somebody that was behind those barriers or in one of those bubbles, I know how dangerous that is, and I know where it can lead. So it needs to stop.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly appreciate what you're saying. I think if it's at the level of, if you voted for, then I'm cutting you off, that makes no sense. But at least to me. But the sort of the invitation, like, so think about Charlottesville, right? I mean, that the president of the United States has said, find people on both sides. Well, it's like, well, that actually could be true. Is that not everybody? Because people show up and get swept up into things. But given the context of what went on there, what was going on there, it was about separatism and hate and that the tiki torch moment of the Jews will not replace us and the blacks will not replace us. It's hard not to. I mean, my feeling is the president's a powerful person, and in some ways, what he can be most, or he or she could be most powerful at is sort of articulating a moral direction for the country and for the people in it. And that certainly wasn't Donald Trump. And, as effective or ineffective as Joe Biden can be, he's not he doesn't fan the flames of animosity. And he does things that piss people off, for sure. But he's not like, you don't get the feeling that he's going out of his way to be hateful. He could be wrong, and he could be doing things that some people think are really wrong. But you don't get the feeling. I don't get the feeling that he's going out of his way to make people at odds with each other. And so, I mean, so I get what you're saying. I definitely get what you're saying. It's like, if it's down to the stupidity that we see in Congress and that we see sometimes in families, it's like, yeah. But I meant in terms also of the groups that you were involved in. Are they on the rise? Are we seeing them, sort of fading, or is it really more and more of what you walked away from?
It's difficult to gauge that at sometimes, because the way I can say from over the years, there's a lot of fluctuation with these groups, because they'll kind of go in waves, like up and down, and then it also depends on what particular groups one's looking at as far as that's concerned. But I think the polarization in the country is getting worse. I don't know if like some of like the hardcore hate groups necessarily are growing. I think probably so, but we're not seeing as much of them in the streets right at this moment, but that could change at any given time. It really kind of depends. It's a tough question. It's a tough question to answer in that sense, because it's easy to say, yes, hate groups are increasing in numbers and things like that. And but what I guess is more alarming to me is some of the that's bad as it is, when hate groups are growing. But what's the biggest concern, I think, is some of the violent rhetoric, some of the most extreme of the extreme on the extremes, some of the people that are openly advocating killing and destruction and bringing down the government. And so a lot of the accelerationist aspect of the movement, the extreme of the extreme. And when I say that, they say, well, wait a minute, you must have been the most extreme because you were in the Nazi party. No. And it's not even close. There's much more, unfortunately, there's much more extreme groups and they're some of these extreme far right groups, if you could even classify them as far right. They're sharing ISIS propaganda, beheading videos, ISIS cooking videos, which is bomb making in your kitchen, things like that. And there's crossing over of ideologies. It's really disturbing.
It's interesting what my conversation with Daryl Davis, he toward the end, he was pointing at, which I thought was really insightful, pointing at that more and more, many of the first of all, there are more organizations. They fragment, they break off into splinter groups, et cetera, et cetera. They don't particularly necessarily get along with each other. And they sort of generate, because none of them are actually sort of accomplishing the ultimate goal. There are people who splinter off and become these lone wolves. And the thing that the groups have been speaking about for years, this country, the browning of America, right? I mean, this country's becoming polluted. It's actually demographically, it's true. More and more people from different places, different ethnicities are part of the population. And it's exactly what they fear. And it generates even, sort of more of the angst and I thought that was really an interesting, and terrifying insight that
it is true. That is true. And that does kick up the fear level in some of these people where where they feel like in their minds. And I think a lot of people look at this, and a lot of people that come out of the movement don't articulate this right either, where they'll say, well, I was just all about hate. It was all about hate. And it's more based on fear. And none of them would admit it. I wouldn't have admitted it when I was there either, but psychologically analyzing it and picking it apart, that's what it is. It's fear. It's like, oh my God, white replacement theory, we're going to be replaced. Okay. The way I look at it is people are here. And I'm talking about now, how I see it, not before, but before it was this fear, oh my gosh, these different people of different races are going to take over the country and they're going to persecute us. Or they're going to come back, they're saying white people did this, white people are colonizers, white people are this and this and this. That's scary for a lot of young white men coming up. If they hear that stuff in the schools, that's reverse racism. It's gonna create that type of activity is creating a whole generation of racists that wouldn't have been racist, that wouldn't be going into that type of ideology. So we need to uplift all of us together, not white people, not brown people, not black people, all of us together as humanity. That's the way to solve that. I mean, we don't want to keep vilifying. That's what the movement does. The movement vilifies the other races and other people, and it's not it's just not good for humanity as a whole.
I'm wondering, might you be willing to be on a podcast with Daryl at the same time? If I can, if anybody
absolutely.
can rope him in, he's always doing something. He's everywhere. Might that be something? Yeah, that would be.
I'd
great.
love to. Yeah,
That would be great.
we do things together. So yes, absolutely, that'd be great.
Well, especially in, for me, it's less. Your stories, both of your stories, yours less so, but Daryl's story is out there so often, right? I mean, and he almost, it's almost like he gets sucked into, because people ask same kinds of questions. I tried not to, but it's just, it's such a great and compelling story that to tell that story, but to really, to see I think it would be a really good thing for people to see an interaction that these people came from so many such different places, and they are friends. In some point in my conversation with Daryl, I said, you keep referring to these people that you've met along the way. You were one of them. I forget the gentleman's name who had been the imperial wizard of et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, are they your friends? Like, would you call them your friends? And he said, yeah, they're absolutely my friends. Cool. That's great. That's a transformation. That is a transformation.
And he's honest about it. He is. I've been to Daryl's house. He's been to my house. We are friends in real life. And it's funny because, as you mentioned that, Daryl and I were at a talk, and there was somebody that had come up after the talk. It was a law enforcement group, and this lady had come up to him and asked him that, and almost in an accusatory manner. She says, Daryl, you keep talking about these people as your friends. They're not really your friends, are they? And I was like, I'm listening, like I'm nearby and I'm listening. I'm like, oh, I want to hear this, because Daryl is very articulate, and he's he's no BS, So, and he goes, I understand what you're saying, he says, but they are my friends, though. And she just kind of I don't think she didn't fully believe it. She wasn't rude about it, but it was interesting because it was almost accusatory, and he gets pushback for the work that he does, and he's an incredible human being.
Yeah, he told me about that he at some point he said, he's got his detractors, and from all sides, and it's like, what?
Mm-hmm.
What? Really? So what? So if I was well versed, what would I be asking you that I'm not?
You've asked a lot of really good questions, David. There's so much to cover.
I think the piece that is, how does it come to pass? The sort of, in the most granular way, how does it come to pass that a young person suddenly is an adult in that world, and then what is that process of extraction and transformation? And I recognize that it's varied for so many different people, and it's a powerful thing, and I'm really grateful that you're doing the work you're doing now, and that you're no longer doing what you were doing, and that you're willing to speak about it and be honest about it and be upfront about it.
I guess I can say, everybody's trajectory into extremism is different. And for some, it's trauma. For some, it's a sense of belonging. For others, it's different things and life experiences. And someone said to me one time, lady that I know, I said, why are you always talking to strangers when we're out in public? Why do you always, compliment strangers, like, I like your dress, or and I said, why do you do that? I was curious about it. And she says, She says, you know, when a little act of kindness like that, and sometimes starting a conversation with somebody that looks like they're having a bad day, can brighten up their whole day. And if you look at the faces, and I started paying attention after that, you know, and to see how that affected people. She goes, that little act of kindness sometimes can change somebody's whole day and their whole outlook. And that's why I do that. And I thought, that's really interesting, because there's a lot of people out there that are struggling that nobody is talking to, and you know, and they don't have anybody, and you don't know what someone's going through. So it's easy to cast stones from afar, or to judge people without knowing their story or their background and stuff like that. So I think it's really important to have conversations, to listen, to you know, reciprocal conversations, to be able to hear and listen, and add perspectives, and I think we just need more of that in society. And I think that's the silver lining. I think if and that anybody can change. If somebody like myself can change, and some of the people that we've worked with, I worked with there was one individual that was in the movement since the 1980s. And this is somebody I knew, actually, you know, and he's out of the movement because of some tragedies that took place in his family, and it took that for him to see, and he says, my grandson will never be involved in the stuff we were involved in, Jeff, because of what it did to my family. I feel like anybody is capable of change. You just have to be able to do it here in your heart, and work at it, and you can do it.
Can I ask you, did you, over the years, I mean, have you, I don't know what to call it, I mean, sort of have you worked with counselor types, whether they're therapists or, you know, or whoever's out there?
I gave some of that stuff a try, and different things like that. And it just wasn't, I don't want to minimize it. I don't want because it didn't necessarily work for me. Most of the work that I did was self work, and reading and learning about this stuff. And also, I do think it is therapeutic in some ways to do the work that I do, and talk through it. But
it can't not be.
Especially that first like 6 months though that I was out of the movement. That was one of the most difficult times of my life, because I'm beating myself up over it, and it's just like me and my thoughts, and I shut the phone off. I wasn't talking to hardly anybody, and that was hell, for lack of a better word. It was really tough. But you know, for everybody it's different, and for some people it makes a world of difference to talk with a counselor or things like that.
Well, Jeff, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm not sure I would have guessed that I would say that and genuinely feel that at the end of the conversation. But and so thank you for being willing to have this conversation. And you know, I'm going to see if I can cash in another chip with Daryl, and if I have any, and see if we can make a conversation between the three of us happen. That'd be
awesome. Yeah, thank you.